projector starts, and so begins this episode of Movie Nights and Matinees, the podcast for people who enjoy movies from when we actually had to go to the movies. I'm your host, Bill Groves, and this is episode 17, Groovy Movies, in which Jim Reid and I will join our guest in talking about rock and roll movies of the 50s and 60s. So, lace up those blue suede shoes, get yourself a malted, and enjoy.
Coming of age, that sort of thing. Marianne, this book will be my triumph.
And you'll never get it through the mails. But hang on to the picture rights. American International will snap it up in a minute.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening. Today's conversation is more than a little nostalgic for me on a personal level, and not just because, as usual, we'll be talking about movies from a ways back. I'll explain what I mean shortly. In the meantime, I'm happy to once again have with me that master of 16mm, Jim Reid. Jim, glad to have you on board.
Glad to be here.
Our guest today is an extremely talented musician, composer, songwriter, purveyor of witticisms, and now internet DJ. Allow me to introduce my friend and enabler, Marty Ross. Marty, welcome to Movie Nights and Matinees.
Well, thank you so much, William. I'm glad that you finally got me on episode 9464. I'm sure that I couldn't be bumped up any sooner, but I'm glad, and congratulations on the launch of this, and I hope that it goes on as long as you want it to.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It occurs to me that I've probably talked about myself way too much in these episodes. So in terms of telling the story of how we met, how about you fill in the listeners from your point of view?
He called me up. We did an interview at my house and he left.
Master of pithiness. Okay.
No,
very succinct.
I've been married for 33 years and I've learned to cut the fat out of my argument.
Okay, well then I'll
you go ahead. I mean, listen, William.
Yes.
The whole story, the story of our friendship, has been based upon the fact that at once upon a time, you came unbeknownst to me from anybody that I really knew, came over and interviewed me about a television show that I did in 1987.
Oh, there you are.
Here I are.
I brought you some water. I was worried about you.
I was busy. Affairs of state.
Excuse me?
I've been working very closely with the president. He needs a new suit. I'm the master of tweed patterns, you know. Tweed, velour. He lets me do whatever I want, as long as I do what he wants, without telling him, so that he can deny that he wanted it.
Now, this was probably in the year 1990, 10 years afterwards, 10, something like that. So,
take.
Yeah. So in any case, we had a great time. You let me run loose with the interview, and I went great. And you left, and then you said, "Did you see the magazine?" Because I said yes, because I went and bought it out at the Centerfold newsstand on Fairfax, and I opened it up, and the guy blasted the show. I mean, it was literally as if I thought, "Wow, I've been blasted." I mean, first of all, it is the new Monkees, so it is kind of like open season. It's literally low fruit, hanging on the ground that rolled into a gutter and rolled out into the sewage canal. But the imagination and how well written the pan was incredible. Some of the other lowlights of the season, it was something like that. It was actually, and we suspiciously became friends. And it was like, from the strength of the panning of the show. So I advise that anybody that comes onto Bill's show, first of all, you never know whether or not he's on your side or not, but it doesn't matter because he's a good guy and he has a great way of panning your project.
Well, thank you.
Jim, take it over, Jim.
Well, you're welcome to pitch in any manner you wish. So, yes, as Marty is alluding to, this was from my magazine, Television Chronicles. The second issue.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, hold on. First of all, yes. What a great magazine. And literally, not your bogus like magazine. This was a well put together professional magazine, and it was cut short too soon. It was a great magazine. I just wanted to tell you folks that if you're out there, you can still find them sometimes on eBay or stuff like that, and they're worth picking up because since they are about history and they are not about the current events going on, that they do work well as research vehicles too, if you're researching any one of a number of shows that are listed there. So anybody that's listening, Television Chronicles, look it up, pay the exorbitant price, and learn.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So where do I go from there?
I promise you neither I nor Bill get a piece of that action.
That's very true. I there's no action of which I am getting a piece at this point. But in any case, so Marty, just give some of your background as a musician as we establish your credentials here for the topic du jour.
Yeah. Oh, I see. I've been a musician. That's all I've ever done in my entire life. That's been my life and my career, what I've done. I started off playing when I was 3 or 4 or 5 years old. Started off with the banjo ukulele at 5. Started teaching when I was 9. I was a very accomplished musician and a good singer by the time I was 16, 17 years old. And it's kind of like, well, you're the best on your block, and now let's go see what happens when in the regionals, and you find out that everybody else is talented too. It's kind of like that. It always happens when we always talk about the starting quarterback. He says he was a star in high school. Of course he was. He was a star when he was 9. But when it comes up to that competition, you're funneling down. I found out that what I thought was really, really very good for me was not really, really very good for the rest of the world. So in terms of what I needed to do, so I needed to write and play, and I got into a couple bands. I got into a band called the Wigs that was from Milwaukee that did pretty well. We did well in Milwaukee, and then we left and we came to Los Angeles, and we got a record deal with CBS, and we did really well. We put out an album before that, but we were in a schlocky kind of movie called My Chauffeur, which actually did fairly well at the box office. And then I got a call to do an audition by my manager, who at the time was Stanley Polly, who was the manager of Badfinger, who is in Pete Ham's Death Note before he committed suicide. So this was a guy, we didn't vet things very well when I was young, man. You don't vet like you did then. You used to vet like, did you hear this guy? No. And one of the times when I walked into, Stanley Polly took me to a bar where Al Cooper was. Al Cooper of Bob Dylan fame and other stuff. And he sat there in the bar by himself. And Stanley went to the restroom and he says, "Is he in the restroom?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Run, just run, run away from this guy. This guy's taking all my money." And 2 guys from Badfinger have killed themselves. And go, "What? This guy? He's my manager? You're telling me?" That's when it kind of like came down to me that maybe I needed something else to do. And one of the things that they suggested that I do was go audition for this new Monkees TV show, which I eventually made. And that was its own chapter in hell. I mean, heaven, But there was this whole thing with, there's about 6 good months there where I thought, wow, I'm good enough now. And then it was not good enough. But after that, I did movies and television. I did lots of Nash Bridges. I did lots of CBS Sports. I've done lots of...
As a composer?
Yeah, television shows and done different things, most mysteriously, for some strange reason. I don't know why it is, but I do know that I was at the right place in the right moment to be providing most of the crowd and hand clap noise in the steerage scene with the Irish in Titanic. So that's probably one of the most great Trivial Pursuit questions of me. What things have I been in? And I was in Titanic, but it was my hand claps and me going like this. Oh, ha, ha! Hee, woo! Can you do another take of oh, ha, yeah, up handling, right? No, didn't say that.
Well, I have that on 3D, so I will have to give it another view and a more careful listen in 3D.
I will give your audience now a free performance of my rendition of me hand clapping on the Titanic.
Okay. Do we have to pay a licensing fee now on that?
Yeah, if I do it 3 times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I can spread them out. No, this is not serious. No. That's so I did it like 30 takes of that. And it was the first time that like digital editing was happening, so they could do that and throw that into a film clip.
You're about to get a call from Cameron's lawyers.
Yeah. Speaking of him, I went to a couple of his New Year's Eve parties, and went to his house, Sarah Retreat, I believe, in Malibu. And funny thing about it was that Charles Bronson lived next door, and he came over to the party, and I said hello to him because Val McCallum was his stepson. And how's it going with the career? Are you doing any music? So it would be Charles Bronson, at Jim Cameron's party. I don't know if I like the party. I smell cigars. It was just a strange thing. Then Cameron had like, well, I'm going off track, but you know what? It's okay.
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. This is a safe place.
Yes,
not
very much.
Not very safe at all.
Yeah. And we kind of scooted by. You mentioned in passing Val McCallum. And he's the son of David McCallum, who, of course,
sure is.
Many people would be familiar with. And he was in the Wigs for a period of time.
He was.
Including the performance in My Chauffeur.
Including we golfed a while back, and he said, I have a set of clubs, and it's fine. So we went golfing, and I looked at the clubs, and the side bag said David McCallum. And I said, oh my God, I'm playing with David McCallum's golf clubs. It's like, every once in a while I get a touch of that Hollywood stuff. And, it just strikes me because David McCallum was a huge fan of when I was a kid.
Did you lift up one of the drivers and say, open channel D to see if anything?
Oh, no, I did not. And so that means that, I just recently worked on Curb Your Enthusiasm. So I continue to work on TV shows, and rarely now, but I recorded an album with Christian Nesmith. He produced it. That album is not yet released, but someday it'll see the light in some way or form. And it's really, really the best music I've ever done. And I'm just looking for the right time and right place to be able to put that out, because a lot of people say, oh, just release it, put it out in your own thing. I'm saying, it used to be when I was young, they used to say, it's like a needle in a haystack, having a hit record or having something in it. I go, well, the haystack's grown a bit. In fact, I could take that needle and throw it out my front window into my yard. It's the whole earth is the haystack now.
Right.
So, it needs to be not just released and stuff like that. But it needs to have something to give it legs, like a TV performance or a film appearance or something like that. And then I'll release it. Or if it doesn't, then I might just say, screw it. I'll just release it afterwards, and do it with some videos and things. I do have plans for it to maybe release it first as an instrumental, which leads me to the talk that we're going to get into about some of my favorite instrumental music of all time is from films. And that leads me to this great love of surf guitar and stuff like that. And I go on the internet, and I was doing some research for this talk today. And I was saying, what's 10 best songs from any film ever? And it's like you could do 100 and there would be 20 different lists. It's 20 different lists. Best surf songs ever, 20 different lists, all different stuff. And I maintain my favorite of all time, if you care to know.
Sure.
My favorite surf song of all time is Theme from Endless Summer. It's The Sandals. And I just love that song. I love that song because it's not danger, surf, this kind of stuff. It's much more dramatic and serious. And the Sandals, those guys, Joris brothers, it was so weird. They founded the restaurant, the Fandango restaurant in Pacific Grove, and I drove right by it like 2 weeks ago. I didn't know this. And I drove right by it saying, looking for a restaurant to go to. And here's this guy from this band, the Sandals, who did this Endless Summer, great movie. It's regarded to being the high watermark of art surf. And so that's kind of like my favorite.
Okay, well, the surf genre certainly ties into a number of the movies that I expect we'll be talking about today. The subject being what I like to call groovy movies, rock and roll movies, primarily of the 60s, but it branches out. I mean, you've got the roots in the 50s and the rock and roll movies that were coming along then when rock was, the new kid on the block, so to speak, and there was a lot of uncertainty as to what it meant and where it was going to go and so forth. Let me ask you this. What's your earliest memory of seeing a rock performer or band in the movies?
My earliest, well, that is really tricky. You're going against a kid that's watching as a kid, doesn't really know what rock and roll is. And by the time I get to being 7 years old, it was 1964, but I'd already been playing music and my parents had folk records and stuff like that. So, remember, you had to really go to the theater to see these movies because they weren't being played on television.
Well, that's the premise of the podcast, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. See how I read up on these things. So, but in any case, it had to have been Hard Day's Night.
Hard Day's Night was my first one too.
And it had to have been that because when I saw that, then I believe after that, it was Little Richard and The Girl Can't Help It.
You'll rock and roll yourself to the happiest time of your life with a sensational array of stars as the screen has ever assembled to delight you. That 7-year itch fellow, Tom Mule. 7 million times itchier than before.
Oh, I've been in men's bedrooms before.
And man, oh, Mansfield. Jane Mansfield, that is. The terrific star of Rock Hunter in her first rocking role on the screen.
But everyone figures me for a sex pot. No one thinks I'm equipped for motherhood.
And Edmund O'Brien as the big shot who has big ideas for Jane.
You got 6 weeks to have her a star. You know, the first thing... 6 weeks? Oh, easy, Fats. It takes time. Rome wasn't built in a day. She ain't Rome. What we're talking about is already built.
All of this, plus the greatest headline entertainers of the day.
Yeah, that's going back to the roots.
That right there was... I've always recommended that movie to anybody. It's funny. It's well written. It's shot so well. It's just a great, and those clips where they're going to the club and they're going, here they are, Little Richard and his band. It's like, and you go, it's Little Richard. And he's shot in his prime.
Well, one thing about The Girl Can't Help It, too, that's also noteworthy just as a film is it was directed by Frank Tashlin, who would do a number of movies with Jerry Lewis, with or without Dean Martin. So it's notable in that regard.
But he did movies with and without?
Well, yeah, some Jerry Lewis solo films, and prior to that, some of the Martin and Lewis comedies.
Was there ever a hit song from a Martin and Lewis movies? There were quite a few Dean Martin hit songs that he sang in the movies, wasn't there? Well,
the one that is most notable, and it's the only one I can bring to mind immediately that was a hit from one of their movies, was from The Caddy. That's Amore, was sung in that.
Yeah, a huge song. You know, musicals kind of set up the idea that you could have a hit song with the presentation of a song in a musical, and it being that, you know, that was kind of like a storied movie relationship that gave so much push. I mean, millions of people coming to see and they hear a song, and they kind of, you know, people always equate MTV with pioneering the movie video, but in actuality, musicals did the same thing years earlier.
Yeah. Well, and there were even, and Jim will probably know more about this than I do, there were short films called Soundies that were done back in, I guess, the 40s. Weren't those used in what were essentially video jukeboxes? Of course, it wasn't video as we know it, but it was film.
And they were all printed in reverse, too.
Interesting.
Yeah, so if you look at a print now, it's backwards on the screen. So.
Cool.
In any case, so these early rock and roll films, it's like they kind of didn't quite know what to do with the style. It was a combination of it's something new, the kids like it, it's silly, we don't need to take it seriously. But then you get into films like High School Confidential, and it's like, oh, this is the end of civilization as we know it with this music.
These are not underprivileged kids from broken homes. Actually, they're the overprivileged. Teenage rebels, too young to be careful, too tough to be afraid. The Beat Generation, young savages from nice families. This is their story. High School Confidential.
I think going back again to Hard Day's Night as being like the before and after thing is that before that, there was always a plot that involved something going on that was silly. that then had music going on as a separate entity, as a presentation. Then they'd go back to the plot. Yeah. Whereas in Hard Day's Night, the plot was about the band and their day.
Yeah.
So wherever they started playing music, they went back off. It was them that it was still about. So very big difference.
Yeah, I noticed some of the evolution. Yeah, because those early films, the music might be part of the plot, but the characters were just characters. And then okay, now we're going to have a performance by Little Richard or Chuck Berry or Chubby Checker, that kind of thing. They really were not involved in the plot per se. But there's a film that kind of creates it's sort of the missing link almost, that I knew the title, but I wasn't really aware of the content of it so much. It was Richard Lester's first feature film, and it was called It's Trad Dad. And this was 1962, I believe. It was known in the States, or released in the States, as Ring-a-Ding Rhythm. And it's weird. It's a little bit schizophrenic because trad in the title is referring to apparently traditional jazz, which is portrayed in the film as being essentially Dixieland jazz. And you've got Acker Bilk in there, the famous clarinetist. But at the same time, and it's one of these stories where it's similar to Footloose in a way. There's this town where the mayor is basically outlawing this type of music, even though it's not just one type of music, because as you go through the film, they're bringing in these acts that we know as early rock stars, Gary U.S. Bonds, Del Shannon, these guys, Chubby Checker, I think, in that one as well. And so it sort of segues from jazz into rock.
The mayor in our town thinks the music we like is undignified.
So we figured if we could get hold of some big disc jockeys, they'd bring down some bands and we could put on a big show.
And prove to him and everyone else that it's great music.
And not at all what they think it is.
And another thing about that film, too, that I was unprepared for, there are gags in that film that you don't really see so much in Hard Day's Night, which was Richard Lester's next film with the Beatles, but they're more of the type you see in Help, kind of surreal gags. I think the only one in Hard Day's Night that really is comparable to some of these gags that are just almost background stuff in It's Trad Dad. The only one I can think of in Hard Day's Night that compares is the draining the bathtub in that, the little twist on reality kind of thing. But that was one that was interesting. And I also thought that Hard Day's Night was a change. There had been a number of films, going back at least as far as Love Me Tender with Elvis, but also in England, they were doing Cliff Richard, that were starring the performer and just having adventures with him, but not as Cliff Richard and not as Elvis.
Right.
So I thought that began with Hard Day's Night, but in fact, 1961, a film called Hey, Let's Twist, and it starred Joey D and the Starlighters as Joey D and the Starlighters. Now, it's not rooted in as much reality as A Hard Day's Night was, in terms of, for instance, there's one of the band members is supposed to be his brother in the film. It's some other guy. But in any case, I thought that was really interesting that it went back that far, where they started to evolve to, we're going to showcase the band as the band, whether it's the reality of things that happen to them or just putting them in a really ridiculous plot, like Hold On. And that's the first one that I remember seeing. I remember the family saw it at the drive-in, and of course, Herman's Hermits in that. Very silly movie.
Well, yeah.
Hold on. Herman and the Hermits tear loose in their new full-feature rock and rollin' riot. It's a shrieking shindig of swingers and surfers and surprises. Touching off an international crisis as they foul up the whole space program.
But that's why the United States is spending billions of dollars on the space program. We have the best and the most dedicated scientists in the world, and now you want one of our rockets to go down in history with a name like Herman's Hermits.
Oh. And then there's the unfortunate Having a Wild Weekend, which is, it's a Dave Clark vehicle that he tried to make to establish himself as a star, and had so many close-ups and starring as somebody else, but it's obviously Dave Clark and the band, and the music's terrific in the movie. It's like another one of those things that it has probably some of the better music that's of that 60s genre, that they didn't just put in filler stuff. They made real songs and put them in there. But yet again, well, we're not going to do what the Beatles did, but we'll do it with characters. And those characters, you can hear the director and the producer going, but, oh, okay, but the director of that was John Borman, I believe.
Yes, and that was his first film.
John Borman. I mean, you sit there and you go, oh.
Yeah. And I tried to watch that again recently, and I honestly, I just couldn't stay with it. I thought, okay, so my memory wasn't faulty on it. It really is, I don't know, at least to me, it came across as really pretentious. Okay, we're going to get into the anti-war thing.
Not only pretentious, but droll. They were able to put droll in with pretentious. It's really difficult to do. But there are a couple scenes in the movie I like. It's when they're driving the cars around, and it's so 60s. It could be condensed down to a video with Having a Wild Weekend. They just use the movie clips and do the cars driving around. They jump in a Jag XKE or a Mini Moke, and they're driving around on the beach and stuff like this. This literally could be a video, but no, it's a 88-minute thing that's like unfortunate. So speaking of that, and hold on, and then you see with Having a Wild Weekend, it showed to me that John Borman was kind of like just doing whatever Dave Clark wanted to do.
What will you do in Spain?
Teach tourist skin diving. Ever done it?
I had to do it once for a commercial.
Like to have a go now?
What, in London in the winter?
I do it all the time.
You know, he wasn't really, he was there to make sure the shots were good and whatever and on. But with Hold On and with This Brown, You Got a Lovely Daughter, I had the feeling that the band just were being told what to do. This is the way that we do it. This is how it's done. This is what we're going to do. And just shut up and do your job and do this. And, you know, you're supposed to be cute in this. We're not making statements. We're just going to make this. And it was unfortunate. You know, they could have done something, but they were Herman's Hermits. You know, they weren't the Rolling Stone. Everybody had a part to play in that British invasion. You can almost see that there's a slice cut out for every member of that entourage called the British invasion. And Herman's Hermits was the ones that the mothers and fathers allowed.
Yeah, I watched Mrs. Brown last night, and other than Peter Noon, I mean, the rest of them are just so wooden. It's just incredible, you know.
Well, he had an acting background, as did Davy Jones of the Monkees, had both appeared on the long-running British TV series Coronation Street. So they had some of that. Now, one thing that was interesting, too, is that prior to the trend that we just talked about with these bands having these adventures in these various films, there was still an adjusted version of the genre where there would be a bunch of kids and there would be these musical acts. And we see it most prominently in the Beach movies. But there was actually one which had Herman's Hermits, as a matter of fact, in I think this was 1960, was it 1963? It was When the Boys Meet the Girls anyway. But what was odd about that one is that was a loose remake of the Gershwin musical Girl Crazy, which had been originally filmed starring Wheeler and Woolsey, and then essentially everything thrown out except the title and the songs for Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland. But it was really funny seeing Herman's Hermits performing Bidin' My Time, the Gershwin song from that musical. That just struck me as really odd. But then you go from there and then you start getting into the Beach movies, and that created a whole genre and some subgenres.
If there's anything you want to know about these kids, I can tell you the whole thing in 2 words. They're nuts.
They're nuts?
You see, you noticed it too. Well, what do you think they do all day? Run all around the beach, and they only got one thing on their mind. Each other.
When did the Beach movies begin in earnest? What was given? Is there a consensus to the first Beach movie?
It's pretty much 62, 63, isn't it?
It's generally, I mean, when we think of them, we always think of, Frankie and Annette, the American International movies. And the first one of those was 1963, Beach Party. And the formula on those seemed to be a combination. Well, first of all, I think we're past the point where rock is seen as a threat. It's kind of a given, and okay, we'll let the kids have fun with it. But what they did in those movies was, at least the American International ones, not so much other studios imitating them, but they'd have the young stars, the Frankie and Annette and so forth. And then they would bring in these veteran actors or comedians like Bob Cummings, Maury Amsterdam, eventually Buster Keaton.
Rickles.
But I want you to know something. I have nothing against kids. I don't mind kids as a whole. In a group, they annoy me a little.
Yeah, Don Rickles, Mickey Rooney at one point. And so then they would have them in there. And then they would have the essentially cameos by the musical groups. And you mentioned the surf music. Well, those early American International ones, the main musical act in that was Dick Dale and the Deltones.
Yeah. Well, I would only say that I agree with what you were saying there, except for one thing. I think that what happened is that for a while there, the initial 55 to 58, 59 onslaught of the original rock and roll thing died out, and it became Bobby V and Frankie and Annette, and it became all that stuff. And that was because the grown-ups took a little breath and just went, see, it was just a fad.
You forgetting my last 2 records sold 1 million each? You forgetting that, Big Daddy?
Your last record was almost 3 years ago. And if you can hear me through those sideburns of yours, there aren't going to be any more records. As a matter of fact, there aren't going to be any more club dates either. Rock and roll has had it, Daddy-O.
It's not going anywhere. It'll die out, and we'll go back to having our kids wearing Izod sweaters and short white pants with wonderful tennis outfits, and everybody will be like this. It'll be the nice, wonderful America that we all thought it would be. And it's all being presented on television by Leave It to Beaver, and it's just everything is going back to what they thought is going to be correct. And if the Beatles after the Beatles broke out and the Stones and all the bands, that if you'd waited a year later, that the Frankie and Annette movies would have never been greenlit. They already had a foothold by the time the Beatles came out, and they were already successful, so they got greenlit for a second movie. But wait a year, and I'm not sure, because they're saying, oh, hell, kids aren't looking at that anymore. Remember, everything was about pop and about just changing the whole angle and attitude towards being teenage consumption. It was now starting to become, what are they going to buy instead of what are their parents going to buy them? Yeah. They had money now. They had money from allowances, whatever, jobs, this and that, summer jobs, and they were spending money like crazy, but they wanted to buy it on their stuff, their movies, their music, their stuff. And it changed pretty drastically towards the course of the next couple years. And speaking of the twist, just to go off on this tangent for a second.
This is the first place I've ever been in which the hip bone ain't connected with the knee bone, and the knee bone ain't connected
What is it, Tizzy? What are they doing?
I don't know. Looks like they're trying to get out of their winter underwear. Hey, baby, that dance got a name?
Can you see what I'm doing?
Yeah, you're twisting yourself into a nervous breakdown.
That's it, brother. The twist. And if you bruise easily, oh, stay away from my hips.
So that's what they call it, the twist.
Who had the first hit? Because I don't think it was Chubby Checker. I think he had the hit on top of the fad that was already happening. The timing was so great. He released the twist when it was hot. He didn't create it. There's a lot of people mistaken that as like being, come on, baby, let's do the twist, as being like, oh, they had to know what it was. It says, come on, let's do the twist, and it goes like this. That was Peppermint Twist. Anyway, let's
see. The Peppermint Twist, what I say, that was, that was 61. Looking at my list here, there's another one called Twist Around the Clock, and I think Chubby Checker was in that, but whether that, I'd have to check the release dates, I guess, because the same year was Hey, Let's Twist with Joey D and the Starlighters, although I've been under the impression that Peppermint Twist came along later than, Chubby Checker doing,
right,
let's do this, but I could be wrong on that. That's an element of it that I haven't really dived into. And then in 62, there was a film called Don't Knock the Twist.
Right. So it's already happening. And it's interesting because all of that doesn't happen without a mass reversal of intention of where people are directing entertainment to. The twist is definitely aimed at the teen crowd.
Right.
Surf movies are definitely aimed at the teen crowd. It's all started from those rock and roll movies, the 5, 6, 7, half dozen movies from the 50s that were hits. That were movies that kids were going to see. And I think the parents let them go by themselves. They said, for the first time, you go ahead. I think it used to be that you used to go to movies with your parents. You used to go with older people. You used to have somebody take you to the movies. Like I was a kid. I remember my dad used to take me to the Saturday matinee. We'd sit there and watch them. And then after a while, that just stopped. I went with my friends. I may have been at the end of what used to be one thing. Then when I saw Hard Day's Night as a 7-year-old and girls screwing it up, I can't hear a thing because they're screaming through the whole movie. I remember my dad walking out of there saying, "I can't stand the noise in there."
Oh, so you're not talking about the girls in the audience in the film. You're talking about at the movie, at the theater.
Oh, at the movie, you couldn't.
They had the girls screaming.
The whole movie. The whole movie. They just screamed and screamed and screamed. The Times Theater in Rockford. It was insane. And my dad like saying, "Do they think they're there? Do they think they're actually there? It's just a film." You know, I never heard that before. And it's funny because at that time, also, Elvis Presley was still in the middle of his so-called film career. And there was another guy that was getting paid $1 million a movie, regardless of what it was. And Colonel would find something. And in those days, that would have been a 30-city tour. Why do that? Go just do one movie. You get your songs out. You release your songs. They're in the movie. So Elvis, even though the movies were just horrible and terrible for the most part.
How dare you think such cheap tactics would work with me?
I ain't tactics, honey. It's just the beast in me.
I mean, when you do, 30 films and 4 of them are, claimed as being very good, and there's no middle ground. There's no, I kind of like change of habit.
I have to share this one thing. One of my earliest memories, because I grew up on a street that was, this neighborhood there were a ton of kids that lived on this street. And so we would just we went around as a pack. But I can remember being, and I'm talking probably 5 or 6 years old, and we're all out playing. And suddenly one little girl comes out on her front porch and yells, "Elvis is on TV." And every little girl that was in our group just was gone. Mm-hmm. We're all just like standing around looking at each other, So
that's cool. Yeah.
Well, I kind of liken draw the comparison, talking about the change of the movies, those ones pre-Hard Day's Night and becoming the beach genre, as being kind of a reflection of the same kind of sanitization that Elvis went through when he got out of the Army, because he did 4 films before going into the Army.
Those are the 4 I was talking about.
Yeah, well, at least 3 of which are actually, I think, pretty doggone good. I mean, you got, for one thing, King Creole, directed by the amazing Michael Curtiz. But then after he comes out of the Army, the ones he did for the most part, he's a singing babysitter. And I think that the beach movies, as an example, were designed to kind of sanitize them, because I guess these largely
parental safe,
right, and
rock and roll movies.
Yeah, and I think it's a combination that's why you also found those veteran comedians to give them a degree of respectability, credibility. Mm-hmm. But also, if these were showing mainly at drive-ins, I think a lot of the kids that they were trying to draw.
Greg, what's the average age of our audience?
15.
Didn't necessarily have their licenses yet, so they needed to have some appeal, or at least some accessibility.
That's a good drive-in movies, and the parents had to drive them.
Yeah, because that's how I saw Hold On. Family, we went to the drive-in. Then it overlaps. Hard Day's Night comes along, and then there was more of a focus on the actual groups as personalities, even if they were doing, as you pointed out with Having a Wild Weekend, where they're supposedly doing these characters. They're still functioning as a group. Okay, it's these guys. They're together. They're doing this stuff. So you had, the couple with starring Herman's Hermits, Dave Clark 5. And then the oddest one to me, as I was looking through this, is one called The Ghost Goes Gear, a British film starring the Spencer Davis Group.
I don't know that one. The Ghost Goes Gear.
Yeah. And the thing of that one is, it starts out as kind of a silly comedy that actually makes Hold On look good in terms of the gags and humor in it, and it culminates in essentially a concert, a fundraising concert. And that was a theme that cropped up in a lot of these too, was that there was some sort of a financial crisis. We have to pay for the mortgage on the sorority house, or we have to save this or that. So we're going to have these bands come together and do a show, and we'll get money for that.
And that really basically was the premise of the Monkees TV show. They needed to pay rent, and they're always broke. We need a gig. So they're always getting into this stuff to try to pay for their beach house, which of course would be worth $27 million now. Yeah. Keep the beach house and sell it, and then you guys don't have anything to worry about. course, I just did one of the things that I truly hate, which is to suppose things upon things that are fictional anyway. Why did they keep the beach? So, yeah.
Well, now, and something else I noticed too in the beach genre, which branches out a little bit. I mean, because for one thing, the American International pictures, they had one called Pajama Party with Tommy Kirk, then taking the male lead. So obviously not a beach picture. And then there's one called Ski Party, and it looked like in that one they were trying to turn Frankie Avalon and Dwayne Hickman, who of course had been famous as Dobie Gillis, trying to turn them into a comedy team, because shortly after that they did one which was not a musical, although it had the Supremes doing the theme song, Dr. Goldfoot and the Bikini Machine, where they have the same two. Right. They have the same two stars and the same two lead character names, right, but they swapped them.
Oh,
they swapped the names.
Maybe they just didn't put the books at the reading table. Kind of fascinating when you mentioned drive-ins and you mentioned beach movies. And for a lot of us, and I know you grew up in the Midwest and I grew up in the Midwest also, for a lot of us, seeing girls in bikinis at the beach with surf and stuff like that was a totally different world, an absolutely incredible world. And I think that the majority of the people that went to see those movies lived in places where that kind of reality wasn't even approachable.
Not many beaches in Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, you don't see a lot of surfing on Grand Lake. So,
yeah, exactly.
Or on the Rock River.
There you go. Yeah. But also, as those movies went on, well, there were other elements that went in there too, because it was also a big era for hot rods, the rat stuff.
Yeah.
And I noticed in a movie called Beach Ball, this was Paramount, 1965, starring Ed Burns, who, of course, had become a teen idol as Kooky on 77 Sunset Strip. There's a point where one of the lead's cars gets wrecked, and he picks it up at the shop, and the guy says, "Oh, I did some customizing on it." No, it's the Silhouette.
Yeah.
Now, if anyone got the first generation of Hot Wheels, the Silhouette is the one. It's kind of bullet shaped. It's got a glass dome over the passenger compartment. But this was several years. But let's see, this was 65. So this was a good 3 years before those first Hot Wheels rolled out. So that was
made a few tweaks in it, right?
Yeah, and then another non-American International from Universal called Out of Sight, which is fun. For one thing, it's spoofing the James Bond, the spy genre. And there's a car in it it's going to be the spy car that is all tricked out with all the gadgets. And it was a George Barris creation, and it was based on the body of the Munster coach. So much for Secret Agent. I mean, you're driving around in this thing, and then everybody's looking at you.
Right.
But that was a fun one. But that's an example of one way in which those movies started becoming more self-aware, because think in Ski Party, even there's several instances of the fourth wall being broken, and references to the fact that they're in a movie.
Yeah,
but,
you know what I think, Bill? I think you're looking at the same movies, different locations, different things. It's the same beach movies, hot rod movies, ski movies. They're all the same thing, exactly the same thing. And I believe that they've, with the hot rod movies, it was always about, we're going to get the fastest car. We're going to have to get into the sweepstakes so we can win money, so we can fix mom's house. And it's always going to be something that we're going to have to win. So, Ski Party, we're going to have to win the downhill. The surf movie is going to take the trophy, for the best surfer. What was the thing that was honestly the most laughable thing that I had as an adult when I started watching those again as an adult was when I saw kids beat surfing in Malibu or at Dockweiler Beach, one of the handful of beaches they used up and down the LA County coast, or Ventura sometimes. And then they poked to footage of the pipeline in Hawaii as being like, that's the local surf. Yeah. And you go, oh my God, it looks like the surf is up today. Mm-hmm. And then they'd go out and surf. And of course, the surf was just nothing. And then they go back to looking out, and the surf was just huge. And I just laughed, and I realized, now that I've been to Hawaii, I've seen those surfs, and I know that that's never, ever happened in Malibu. They'd have a tsunami warning every half hour if that was true. Some of those things, like the hot rod movies, I've always been interested in cars, always. And those hot rods came to Rockford 1966 on a caravan, promoting, I don't know which hot rod movie it was, so it shows you how pathetic it was, but they came and they brought them and they had them on 3 of the cars, and I believe Silhouette was one of them. And they had these cars on. It was a whole 2 days. They're coming, and it was a big thing in our town. This movie's coming, and people are coming, and they're doing a whole promo. And then the bands played, and there was the Shantays or whoever it was. It was a band that they'd get, and these were cross country promotions that they had. And I don't know if they came to your town, but they came to Rockford, so I suspect that they might have come to your town too. But I tell you, I was fully ensconced with that stuff. It's almost as if like they said, well, you've been watching surf movies, and now here's the hot rod movies. And it was the Beach Boys, I believe, that they actually did kind of go from one style to the other. They started off being a surf band, then they turned to a hot rod band, and then Brian Wilson smoked pot and changed the whole thing. So you really can the Beach Boys do personify a lot of that, going from one end to the other. But I believe the Frankie and Annette things, they went far past their due date, didn't they? They did a movie into 67, something like that.
Well, eventually in some of these films, they started not being the couple, a couple, but they'd make cameos in each other's films in one manner or another. In fact, I think it's Ski Party, actually. There was a pretty funny cameo by Annette, even though she's really not in the movie to any degree. Yeah. So like I said, you got the Ski Party, the hot rod movies, the beach movies, all pretty much the same kind of thing. And then this gets back to the movies that starred musical acts, performers. The self-awareness continues, and you start seeing some cynicism work its way in. For instance, the same year, 67, saw Head with the Monkees and Good Times with Sonny and Cher, which was the first feature film of William Friedkin, another major director.
Yeah.
And they both spoof primarily the movie industry, I guess the music industry to some extent in Head, but Good Times is more the movie. There are jokes in there. George Sanders plays a producer who wants to make a movie starring Sonny and Cher.
The business bores me, Sonny. Motion pictures excite me. And I must confess that the prospect of making a motion picture with you and Cher is something that I find most exciting.
All right, here's the thing. We've had a lot of offers. I'd like to do a story.
Oh, yes, a story. An astute observation. We need a story, and we'll get one. Good one. The best. Mere detail, of course. Mere frosting on the cake, so to speak.
And he's just got this generic script that he wants to throw him into. And Sonny's resisting that, and he's fantasizing. It's kind of a Walter Mitty kind of structure. He has these different segments where he envisions himself as a Tarzan character,
Bill,
a Western star, and then a detective.
Johnny, have you ever thought of getting into some other kind of work?
Man's got to stick to the work he knows best.
That's what I mean. This private eye stuff is getting us nowhere.
Look, Sam, I told you 100 times. Next case I saw, bang, we get married.
That's what I mean. You told me 100 times.
What's a hurry, Sam? You're only 19.
Yeah, but we've been engaged 7 years. People are beginning to talk.
Not as much as they talked when we first got engaged.
But at the end of it, it all is a rejection of the industry. Yes.
William.
Yes.
It's 1967.
Mm-hmm.
Who would you rather be? George Sanders or George Sanders' agent? To have to call him up to tell him, I've got you a job. It may not be too good, but George Sanders was such a huge film star that to think of him being in this kind of dopey films, or that's just depressing. I
have to stand up for that one a little bit. I was expecting it to be a lot dopier than it was, but it had more of a commentary to it than I was expecting. Still, I get your point, and as I was watching it, I'm thinking, okay, how long after this was it that he committed suicide? But
what day was it that he committed suicide? When was that? I know when it was. I can tell you why I know it was.
Okay.
The Ross family had traveled from England down to Barcelona and traveled to a place we were going to stay for the next 6-7 months. My dad was on a sabbatical, and we were going to live in a town called Castelldefels. We drove down to Castelldefels, and there was ropes and all this stuff. And what happened? It says, well, the hotel we're supposed to stay at the night before we move into our apartment over the ocean, this really great place that was way above our pay grade, but my dad lucked into it. Well, this hotel we're supposed to stay in was closed because George Sanders had committed suicide the night before.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what year was that?
With 1971.
Okay, so a few years later.
With $40,000 in cash in his room. Which was a mighty amount of money even then, but it's probably $500,000 now. And so my mother looked at my dad and said, "Are you sure this is a nice town?" So when I say about George, his career was at a place where he'd rather not. What did he said something and it says, "I'd rather not live another day like this." And
I seem to recall it was that life was such a bore, or had become such a bore.
Life is so boring. And his accent, the way that he talked, literally, he was probably next up for Nescafe commercials. This is like where his career was. But in any case, I interrupted because when you mentioned George Sanders, it rings a bell for me all the time, every time.
Sure.
Don't you know, after all those years of being out of work, Victor Mature showed up and, I've got a movie. And
right.
Because I watched Head last night, and I don't know what Bob Rafelson and Nicholson were smoking. I mean,
you say that apparently in jest, but I think that's actually pretty much the truth from what I've read. They actually did go to a hotel, and they all sat around, doing whatever kinds of drugs, and that's how the script came about.
That Mickey says that all the time. Mickey says, "You know what the movie Head is about?" It says, "If you find out, please tell me."
It's about 90 minutes.
Yeah, it's what's interesting about Head is the fact that here are people that know how to make pictures. It's just total insanity. It's as if somebody took Jackson Pollock and handed him scripts with glue on it and threw them at a board, and they directed it. That's literally what it looks like, doesn't it?
Yeah, pretty much does.
Yeah.
So, all right. So then we're getting into the pop art, the psychedelia era, and you see that sort of thing reflected in Head, and again, Good Times. You see some of that, the Roy Lichtenstein artwork type sets and things like that.
Include the Beatles again. Well, not the Beatles, but Yellow Submarine for it.
Right. Exactly.
It's very psychedelic.
Yeah, blend of psychedelia and pop art.
Right. Right.
And so then there's a shift, and Marty, you pointed out this to me when we talked before, that it moves more towards rock as a soundtrack, as a background for movies that are coming along then. And whether it's the Hollies doing the theme for After the Fox, or Noel Harrison doing Windmills of Your Mind for Thomas Crown Affair, or you get into movies where it's actually playing under the action. And you mentioned Easy Rider.
Yeah.
And then The Magic Christian also comes to mind.
That's true also. You have directors that said, "Hey, I'm looking more for a song here than a score." Or the directors became huge fans of the music that they were listening to. Most recently, before that time, the music hadn't appeared anywhere else, had appeared in other places as hit songs. And now you were hearing a song again that you already heard of, which was before in the surf movies and the hot rod movies. Mostly, I can't speak to 100%, but mostly had songs that were written and done quickly for that movie. That's how they perceived it. But in movies going towards the later 60s and early 70s, starting to use songs as background for existing picture, songs that were known. Some of them weren't, some of them were, but most of the biggies that you come up with, Zoetrope, Coppola using Jim Morrison, Riders on the Storm, in Apocalypse Now, you start hearing, "This is the end."
Yeah.
And you know the song because it's famous, but then it switched an entire different kind of synapse in the brain. Now the picture is going along with music instead of hearing the music for the first time to a picture you had never seen before. So it kind of like lets you into a feeling that you've been there before. It draws you in maybe even farther than it did before. I think it was inevitable that would happen, but it couldn't necessarily happen with a Gary Lewis and the Playboys cut. you don't have to paint me a picture in Apocalypse Now, unless it's on the radio. It would be used as something that would be completely over the background and laughable, because they've got guns drawn in them, and you hear Gary Lewis, "This diamond ring doesn't shine for me."
Some sort of counterpoint to the action.
Right. Absolutely. But they didn't look at it that way. So, it was very important. A lot of things that I've ever had placed in TV and films were songs that either I redid or they were completely an homage to a certain style. Very rarely were they completely original. So the business had completely changed. I mean, if you take a look at modern soundtracks, I think the only movies that really do these things now are end titles to major films, which would be like, that's the big song that's going to be like released. That's it. The rest of the soundtrack are songs that everybody knows and has heard before. That's kind of different. It's kind of a James Bond thing. James Bond was always the big thing with James Bond ever since Shirley Bassey or Goldfinger. A hit song could be made from leading a film also, which wasn't done a lot, Hold on.
Right.
Well, yeah, with every James Bond film, the big questions were always, who's the Bond girl going to be and who's going to sing the song,
That is, you're absolutely right.
So getting back to what we're referring to as groovy movies, and even though we've gone into some other areas, such as the ones, with the soundtrack and all that, I guess I'm primarily thinking of either the ones that were the beach movies or clones of various types, or the ones with bands, or Elvis, as the case may be, in the lead roles. Now, among all those, do you guys have any either favorite movies within that framework or favorite performances within those? Jim, do you want to start? Do you have anything that comes to mind?
In the beach movies?
Well, either the beach movies or ones that starred either individual like Elvis or a band.
Yeah, well, I loved Hard Day's Night. I think that's got to be my favorite. But I also like Help a lot. Yeah. I like the surreal quality of Help.
Yeah. So, Marty, what about you? What are some favorite, either a favorite movie or a favorite performance of a song within any of those movies?
There's a lot. I'm just trying to think of it as being something like, when am I talking about? What era of my life? Things do change. As like I said, the Beatles' Hard Day's Night thing with Jim, I never ever questioned that movie. It's always been a real, like a documentary to me. Mm-hmm. It seems to me my favorite performance has to be, well, when I first saw Little Richard and The Girl Can't Help It, I mentioned it before, I literally thought that this is the beginning of rock and roll. This is it. And this is where it happened. This is the guy. This is where the fire is. You've got the literate guy, Chuck Berry, with his pretty lyrics and incredible. You've got this certain swing with Fats Domino. You have these guys, and yet Little Richard is just sitting there. Somebody saying, if you had to go to a forest and you needed something to light the forest fire with, you'd bring Little Richard with you. Because Little Richard could light the flame under anything. It was just that. And I think that performance, he's dressed completely to the nines. He looks perfect. His band's in the background. And he does something that many other people didn't do at the time, is that he absolutely syncs his piano playing exactly to the recording. Nobody else to do that.
And which song is this that he's performing?
That was Ready, Steady, Go, Cat, Go. So Ready, Teddy, or is that what it's called?
I think so. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've listened to it, but I think that's the title. Yeah.
So when I saw that after I saw Hard Day's Night. And then I realized that was what I was seeing was the origin story. And so for me, I think that has to be it. It's just, to me, it's just it sticks out. There are other performances. There's one that I liked when I was a kid, and one that's just completely off the base of that and then the Beatles, is the Beach Boys singing Little Honda in the opening of another film.
Girls on the Beach?
Yeah. And they're singing it. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is the Hondells. but it's the Beach Boys, the actual band. And there's actually first gear. And it's all right. It's like, wait a minute. Yeah, maybe Brian said, there's a hit song here, folks. And I wrote it. So why don't we do it? I appreciated seeing that. We haven't talked about the impact of two films that were purely musical that had a huge effect upon teen America also, which was the Tammy Show and the TNT Show. Those movies, when they got released, I went to see them, and I never saw anything before it like in my life or afterwards. And then later on, many years later, Don Peake, who was the band leader of Ray Charles, and he's sitting right behind Ray Charles the whole time, signaling, because they had the staging set that the orchestra was up 30 feet up in the air and beyond, and he had to sit there and sit behind him because he would watch Ray's right hand for the rhythm, and he would signal the band between Ray's hand and the rhythm going on up at the orchestra for I think that's the Tammy Show. Or might be TNT Show, but it's either one of those. But then years later, I would be jamming with him on Lopez Island, House of the Rising Sun, and then getting asked to like perform with the Wrecking Crew. Oh, by the way, shameless plug, we're playing the 29th and 30th at the El Portal Theater in North Hollywood, 2 shows, by the way, featuring the music of Ray Charles. I'll be there doing My Righteous Brothers and Glenn Campbell and Sonny and Cher and other stuff. But we have Cal Ellis, who was signed to Ray Charles Records in the 70s and was an understudy of Ray Charles, who's going to be singing the Ray Charles things. And he happens to be blind and black. And we've told him, I said, you're overqualified. Mm-hmm. You don't need to do both of those. You can do one of them and we'll, but no, it's going to be great. But those TNT and Tammy shows, I believe that was taking the veil off and letting everybody see exactly how great, how cool this music was. I mean, they had everybody on, the Byrds, Love and Spoonful, Ray Charles, James Brown, Rolling Stones. I mean, incredible music. And anyway, I think that those things brought a lot of people, that youth, to come out to see movies in that kind of like that weird time. Because we had the surf movies, which were just clean. I mean, they're so squeaky clean. They're almost gag clean. You know what I mean?
And there are some of those where they spoof, again, they're self-conscious about it, and they actually include that in the humor on some of those.
Right.
You mentioned James Brown, one of the, I guess, most startling appearances by a musical act in any of those was in Ski Party.
Hey, are you really the ski patrol?
You were expecting maybe Rock Hudson.
Have you saved many lives lately?
4.
4? How wonderful. Who?
Well, first there was Bobby. Then second, Lloyd. Then me twice.
Oh, I know who you really are. You're James Brown and the Flames. I have all your records.
Shh, don't tell my mother. She still thinks I'm in the army.
You're going to sing for us, aren't you? Sure, come on.
Out of sight.
And he does I Feel Good. So that was a little unexpected. Yeah. Now, for me, though, I think in terms of talking about a favorite performance, it's got to be the You're Gonna Lose That Girl in Help. I consider that to be maybe the greatest music video sequence ever filmed. The combination of the quality of the song, the lighting, the camera work, editing, it's Bill, I think just brilliant.
They were so honest. The Beatles were just such an honest group. They couldn't figure out, this is going to be of you guys recording the song and we're going to do that. They had to flip away from the regular thing to show Ringo playing the bongos, just to establish the fact that he did.
Right.
And, it's like, and they break away, Paul's playing a little piano, just a little bit in that. And, that's a perfect scene. They're trying to recreate Abbey Road 2 in that. They've got the guys in the booth up, way up. And that doesn't happen in any other studio I've ever been in the world except Abbey Road 2. That's the only one where you're sitting there way above in a little room, and that's not it. So, and they also came up with the idea, how are we going to end the song? And they've got the drilling of the hole of Ringo's thing. It's actually a brilliant, brilliant scene. The whole thing is done well. Yes, I agree with you. I don't think Help is as strong of a movie plot-wise as Hard Day's Night, but its music stuff is done so well. You Got to Hide Your Love Away is just, when Ringo taps and he's sitting in that sunken thing, you think he's actually really playing it for you then. And you sit there, and the girl's sitting at the couch, and I believe George is trying to pick up on her while the song is going on. And there's the Ticket to Ride sequence. It's absolutely spectacular. They show the notation of the song over they show
on
this
the power lines. Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, it was the same thing. No, I agree. I think You're Gonna Lose That Girl is a great performance. And I didn't think of it that way in terms of being a single performance, but it is a single performance. But yeah, I'll agree with you. And I'll say that You Got to Hide Your Love Away is one of the best. It looks because it's just so real.
Yeah.
I know the microphones they're using, they're Telefunken M49s, and they can't, those microphones.
Oh, there you go,
now,
name dropping.
Yeah. Well, those microphones now are probably about 50,000 a piece. But if they were the ones they used in that film, ooh, good Lord. I wonder where those are now.
Who knows? All right. So we already talked about, or you mentioned your upcoming show with the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
That you're now performing with some regularity with these guys, of course.
Every time.
Yeah, the legendary studio musicians who were the subject of a terrific documentary that's out there that I encourage anyone to watch. So that's extraordinarily cool. What we alluded to earlier, if you can just give us a quick plug on, is now your internet DJ job.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. About 3 years ago, there was a bunch of people that were interested in, there's a Beatles channel, a Springsteen channel, there's all these channels, but there's no Monkees channel. We researched it. We found out that in many ways, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to put together a channel for a band that has 15 different writers with 15 different publishing deals, with 15 different needs and different money and different release rules. We decided that we'd go ahead and do this anyway, knowing that there was a restriction that we could only play 4 Monkees songs every 3 hours. What are you going to do with that? So we decided that we would play as much of the influences, live concerts and stuff, get people involved, solo stuff, which we got permission from to play all of their solo stuff, and surround essentially the Colgems records with 200 songs that were brought in by fans or this or that or whatever, Davey, Peter, Mickey, Mike, individual songs. And it's been working. It does. It's really, really fun because of the restrictions that we had, we are better than we would have ever been just playing the greats and just revolving them, which is probably what would have happened.
And the name of the station is
Monkey Mania Radio. Monkey Mania Radio, and you can get that if you just plug in on your internet, monkeymaniaradio.com. You'll see a thing called Live 365. And it doesn't ask for any money or anything. It's just a service that plays stuff. And we are on Live 365. We're on also around the world on tunein.com. And there's some that are in Australia and in England, in Africa. There's other different places where you can get us around the world on different service engines. But it's been a lot of fun. And I find it challenging. I play a lot of stuff that's influenced or was played around the era of the Monkees, 1966, 67. And I found out so many different things that I can't fathom because I literally grew up as a 10-year-old, 10-year-old when the Monkees came out, and they were the biggest band of my childhood in my world. They literally had October of 66 till June of 67, 3 different albums, all number one, without any other people in number one in between. That's never been done, and that doesn't happen because they don't release records like that anymore. Well, until Taylor Swift, obviously. Now you've got, seven streaming albums out of top 20, and she's got. So, things do change, but in the physical era, there was nothing ever like that.
And when are you on? What are your shifts?
Oh, I'm on every day, Monday through Friday from 11 until 1 a.m., and then it repeats at 11 p.m. till 1. That's West Coast time.
Okay, Pacific time. All right.
Yeah. So I'm generally when people are out of the office having lunch.
Okay.
Or generally getting to bed. But I'll tell you what, it's been a thrill. We have great great DJs. We care about the station. We talk amongst ourselves on a private chat room all the time about anything going on with the Monkees, what we're planning on doing on promotions, this and that. There's always stuff that's fun to do. It doesn't get tiring. I don't know when this premieres, your show.
Oh, it's going to be a week from now.
Oh, no. Happy 2025, everybody. Oh, sorry. Bill Groves has now edited the piece down that we did and has taken most of my words away.
Well, and we have gone a bit long on this one, but yet I still have to ask you the final question that I always ask my guests, and that is,
it's Fruit of the Loom.
Okay, no, that's when you come back for the second appearance.
Oh, I see.
Now, what is your most memorable movie-going experience?
Going to see Hard Day's Night as a 7-year-old and hearing girls scream, and I didn't hear any of the movie. I'd never experienced anything like that before. Oh, actually, there's another one too.
Okay.
Well, I'd have to say that the second biggest one is going to see My Chauffeur on the movie theater and seeing myself on the big screen singing a song. I don't know how embarrassed I was, or whatever, but it was absolutely the most thrilling thing. It's this, there I am, and they keep going back to me. And I thought they'd cut it out.
Well, you were singing the lead vocal, so, there was a bit of a motivation. Yeah.
Fire! And then to keep thinking that if only that song had been a hit, then I could have had Water as the backup. It could have been, Water! You know what I mean? It's a terrible joke, but I've used it for years. It still works. No, and the third one would be, there's a third one. That would be going to theaters 1987, June, July of 87. All the Cineplex Odeon's theaters across the country played the first commercial before us. And it was the new Monkees doing New Coke. Turn it up! Let the music thunder! And there they are. Hey, watch for the new Monkees. Folks, it's like this. And I took a date. And I took a date out to that movie theater. And, here I was going to think, I'm going to get lucky tonight for sure when he sees me up on the big screen. And then all of a sudden it comes on, it does this stuff, and it goes, turn it up! New Coke and the new Monkees coming this fall. Boo! 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 Boo!
We want Davy. We want Davy.
Yeah, it's the same. But feeling her arm come off of my lap and back slowly into hers at the hearing of the boots, and I went, "That's it," And it was nice meeting you. Yeah, thank you. This is where I live. Yes, it was pretty. That I should have taken the hint. That was one of the things that kind of drove me into thinking maybe this isn't what it's supposed to be. But I still stick to Girls Screaming, Hard Day's Night, #1. Thank you for the interview and the time. And Jim, I want you to know that Bill told me some strange things about you.
They're all true.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to know.
Must have been during one of my Dr. Pepper blackouts or something.
Well, just because you're not allowed to live near a school doesn't mean anything. And I know that. Yeah. So in any case, I appreciate you being patient with me, Jim. I don't care much for Bill, but it's you that I care about, and I have concerns. I just want you to know I'm okay. And you're okay.
Well, thank you.
Okay, I appreciate you talking to me, and you brought out a lot of things that unfortunately I had to remember.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. All right. Well, once again, so everybody check out Marty's gig on Monkey Mania Radio. See him with the Wrecking Crew or solo whenever you have the opportunity. And Marty, thank you for joining us on Movie Nights and Matinees.
Yay! Don't do this. I'm changing my number.
Hey, don't make me call Jared.
Oh.
All right. I hope you enjoyed Twisting the Night Away with Marty Ross, or the morning or afternoon, as the case may be. As usual, you can find links for ordering copies of movies we talked about, and a number that we didn't, on the screening room page of the Movie Nights and Matinees website. Also, if you didn't get enough Marty to suit you, as if that's even possible, Be sure to listen for him on Monkey Mania Radio. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to make sure that you don't miss upcoming episodes. And please leave a rating or review where possible. Visit the comments page on the website to offer up feedback, which you can also do on the Movie Nights and Matinees Facebook page. Let us know what you thought of the episode and maybe which groovy movies strike a chord with you. Pun fully intended. Be sure to join us for episode 18 coming in October. Now, if I can just think of an appropriate topic for October.
Now remember what we gotta do.
What a crummy neighborhood.
Yeah, it's spooky.